They were once the unstoppable kings of the American road. The roaring engines, chrome grills, and towering stance of the pickup truck defined an entire culture: freedom, power, and hard work wrapped in steel. But now, something has gone terribly wrong. The very symbol of American independence is collapsing under its own weight, and 2026 might be the year the legend finally dies. For decades, the pickup was more than just transportation, it was identity. From construction sites to suburban driveways, from farmers to executives, everyone wanted one. Automakers fed that hunger, turning simple work trucks into luxury status symbols. Leather interiors, massive touchscreens, turbocharged engines, and price tags that climbed higher every year. The base Ford F-150 that once sold for under $30,000 now costs over $60,000. The GMC Sierra Denali, once a farmer's companion, now starts at $72,000. Meanwhile, wages barely moved. The dream of owning a truck became a debt trap for millions. But behind the glossy commercials and roaring engines, the market was quietly breaking apart. Dealers were sitting on mountains of unsold inventory, financed through loans they could barely service. To keep the illusion alive, automakers offered 0% financing and desperate discounts, trying to push trucks out the door at any cost. Yet the truth is impossible to ignore. The pickup bubble is about to burst. Online, stories are spreading like wildfire. Buyers discovering that their brand new trucks have lost 20, 30, even 40% of their value within months. Social media feeds are flooded with frustrated owners realizing their trucks are worth less than the loans they took to buy them. The myth of the forever truck has crumbled. Inside corporate boardrooms, the panic has begun. Analysts whisper about a 2 million unit oversupply by 2025. Factories are still running, warehouses overflowing, and profits evaporating. Dealers are suffocating under the weight of unsold steel, each truck sitting on their lots burning interest every single day. For many small-town dealerships, the next year could be their last. Ford, GM, and Ram are scrambling to reinvent themselves, quietly working on budget electric models, slashing production costs, and rethinking what a truck should be. Because the truth is, the old formula no longer works. The market doesn't want excess anymore. It wants honesty. This isn't just another dip in sales, it's a cultural shift, a psychological breaking point. The American truck, that symbol of strength and independence, is being forced to start over. And in 2026, the world will watch as the mighty fall, because the era of the big, loud, expensive pickup is ending. And the next generation of trucks? They'll be smaller, quieter, and smarter, whether Detroit likes it or not. For nearly a century, the pickup truck stood as the beating heart of America's automotive identity. A machine forged in sweat, steel, and pride. It wasn't just transportation, it was a badge of honor, a declaration of self-reliance, a rolling symbol of the working class. But somewhere between the factory floor and the glossy showroom, that symbol began to twist into something unrecognizable. The pickup that once embodied hard work and humility has morphed into a monument of excess, a luxury good disguised as a tool. And the numbers tell a story that's both fascinating and alarming. Over the last decade, the average price of a full-size pickup in the United States has skyrocketed by nearly 60%. A base Ford F-150, once the reliable companion of plumbers, farmers, and small business owners, now sells for over $60,000. GMC's Sierra Denali, once a rugged workhorse, starts at more than $72,000. Even the supposedly budget models like the Ram 1500 Tradesman can easily cross the $50,000 mark once basic options are added. Meanwhile, the median household income in America has barely moved, inching up only 10% in the same period. The gap between the cost of owning a truck and the ability to afford one has never been wider. In 2012, nearly half of all pickup buyers in the U.S. were from blue-collar professions. Today, that number has dropped to 23%. The new pickup owner is more likely to be a suburban professional than a construction worker, more likely to be paying for comfort and prestige than payload and power. What was once a tool of necessity has become a status symbol. Automakers have leaned into that transformation, pouring billions into luxury interiors, oversized infotainment systems, and performance packages few will ever truly use. heated tailgates, massaging seats, panoramic sunroofs. The modern pickup is built less for hauling and more for showing off. But behind the shimmering paint and chrome lies a truth few in Detroit want to admit. The pickup boom wasn't organic. It was engineered. According to internal documents leaked from one major manufacturer in 2024, executives deliberately phased out affordable models to push consumers toward higher margin trims. One memo even described price tier compression as a strategy. Limit entry-level availability, inflate the base price, and rely on dealer incentives to create the illusion of choice. It worked. For a while. In 2023, Ford's profit margins on high-end F-150 trims exceeded 25%, the highest in company history. But this success came with a price, alienating the very customers who built the pickup legacy in the first place. In rural states like Texas, Oklahoma, and Montana, where trucks once outsold sedans 10-1, sales have begun to plateau. Farmers are holding on to their old vehicles longer than ever. The average age of a working pickup in the Midwest is now 13.4 years, the highest since records began. Some ranchers even resort to rebuilding 15-year-old models rather than taking on debt for a new one. In an ironic twist, small communities that once defined the pickup market are now abandoning it. The shift isn't just economic, it's psychological. For decades, truck commercials portrayed strength, grit, and freedom. But for many buyers today, those slogans ring hollow. Owning a $70,000 zero-cents truck financed over 7 years doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a chain. Online forums are filled with frustrated stories. A welder from Nebraska forced to refinance his F-250 after interest rates climbed. A small business owner in Arizona who returned his Ram Rebel after realizing his monthly payment was larger than his mortgage. And that's the tragedy at the heart of the story. The pickup truck, once the ultimate expression of simplicity and utility, has become a mirror reflecting America's economic divide. For the few, it's a luxury toy. For the many, it's a dream slipping further out of reach. The symbol of independence has become a symbol of inequality. And as 2026 approaches, the weight of that contradiction threatens to crush the myth entirely. The truck that once pulled America forward is now dragging the industry, and its own legacy, toward the brink. By 2024, the American pickup truck market had reached a strange and dangerous equilibrium, one that looked stable on paper but was in truth a fragile illusion propped up by debt, discounts, and denial. Dealership lots across the country shimmered with endless rows of unsold trucks, their chrome grills gleaming under the sun like monuments to overproduction. Yet the official numbers from Detroit still told a story of strength. Record inventories, steady output, and strategic market optimism. Behind the press releases, however, insiders were whispering a very different story. The system was bloated. The shelves were full, and the whole thing was held together by credit lines that were beginning to fray. For years, automakers had relied on one simple trick to keep the wheel spinning: build more trucks than the market could reasonably absorb, then push them out through aggressive financing. 0% interest loans, delayed payments, buy now, pay next year offers. The strategy sounded familiar, eerily reminiscent of the real estate tactics that preceded the 2008 housing crash. Dealers became the middlemen in this balancing act, taking on hundreds of vehicles at a time under floor plan financing agreements. Every unsold truck sitting on a lot represented borrowed money. Every day it sat unsold meant another tick upward in interest owed. By late 2025, many dealerships were drowning in their own inventory, unable to move the metal fast enough to stay afloat. An internal report by the National Auto Dealers Association, quietly circulated among executives in early 2026, estimated that U.S. dealers were collectively holding over 1.8 million unsold pickup trucks, nearly twice the normal inventory level for the segment. Some smaller dealerships, particularly in rural regions, reported stockpiles so large that they began renting warehouse space or even abandoned shopping malls just to store their excess vehicles. Satellite images of one distribution center in Kansas showed acres of brand new trucks sitting in the open, collecting dust beneath the prairie sun. The photos went viral, sparking online speculation that the so-called truck boom had already imploded. Adding to the chaos was a web of deception designed to maintain investor confidence. Quarterly reports highlighted strong retail performance, while quietly omitting that as much as 40% of sales were artificially inflated through internal leasing programs. Vehicles technically sold but never leaving company control. Several analysts began calling it shadow inventory, an unspoken secret meant to prop up stock prices and quarterly bonuses. By the end of 2025, analysts at Bancorp North estimated that up to $28 billion, 0 cents worth of pickup trucks were sitting in limbo, either unsold, unregistered, or artificially classified as fleet assets. This artificial stability couldn't last forever. When interest rates rose again in early 2026, the system cracked. Dozens of dealerships filed for bankruptcy in just 3 months. Regional distributors began defaulting on payments to manufacturers. Local news outlets ran footage of parking lots filled with hundreds of untouched trucks, brand new yet utterly worthless to anyone who didn't have the credit or desire to buy one. The American pickup, once the symbol of unstoppable demand, had become a cautionary tale of corporate overreach and financial self-delusion. The infinite appetite for big trucks that executives swore would never fade was a mirage, and the moment the loans dried up, the market's true fragility was exposed. Beneath the polished ads and patriotic slogans lay the uncomfortable truth. The truck bubble wasn't just a market correction waiting to happen. It was already happening. One unpaid invoice at a time. Banks and credit unions reported that the average loan term for a new pickup had stretched beyond 84 months. Nearly a quarter of all pickup owners were now what the industry called underwater, owing more on their loans than their trucks were worth. In states like Georgia, Ohio, and Utah, repossessions were quietly hitting record highs, though few lenders wanted to publicize the numbers. A leaked report from Horizon Finance estimated that repossessions of pickup trucks had risen 38% in 2024 alone, a trend that analysts compared to the subprime mortgage meltdown of 2008. Some dealerships, desperate to keep their numbers up, began approving buyers with little to no credit history, relying on soft lease programs backed by private equity firms. It was, in every sense, a ticking bomb disguised as a business model. For the buyers, the emotional fallout was as severe as the financial one. Truck ownership had always carried a cultural weight far beyond utility. It was tied to identity, pride, even masculinity. Now that symbol had turned into a burden. Online forums filled with stories of people crushed under payments, of families forced to sell personal belongings just to cover loan interest. One viral post on Reddit's r/trucks subreddit came from a construction worker in Colorado who admitted he'd sold his F-150 to buy a used Prius, calling it the most humiliating but freeing thing I've ever done. His story struck a chord because it reflected something bigger. The end of the illusion that owning a massive truck automatically meant success. That illusion began to crumble faster once consumers realized just how manipulated the market had become. Investigative journalists uncovered widespread price manipulation at dealership networks across the country. Markups on high-demand models reached absurd levels, as much as $15,000 0 cents above MSRP in some regions, while dealers simultaneously pushed dealer protection packages that offered little more than tinted windows and floor mats. A survey by the Consumer Policy Institute in late 2025 found that 74% of buyers believed they had been misled about pricing during their purchase, and over half said they would prefer to buy directly from the manufacturer if given the option. The fallout from this betrayal of trust was catastrophic. Brand loyalty, something automakers had taken for granted for generations, began to erode at an unprecedented rate. Ford, once synonymous with working-class reliability, saw its customer satisfaction index drop below that of Hyundai's small sedans. GM's reputation for professional-grade engineering took a nosedive when it was revealed that some of its luxury trucks were being assembled with lower-cost imported parts to offset rising production expenses. Even Ram, long praised for its interiors, faced backlash after whistleblowers exposed that cost-cutting measures had reduced crash test scores on several models. The mask was slipping, and buyers were no longer blind. But it wasn't just trust that collapsed, it was desire itself. The cultural aura of the pickup truck was fading. What had once been marketed as the ultimate expression of rugged independence now looked bloated, excessive, and out of touch with modern realities. Gas prices had stabilized but not fallen, maintenance costs remained sky-high, and the idea of driving a 7,000-pound machine through city traffic began to feel absurd. For many younger consumers, the pickup represented the opposite of progress. A 2025 Pew Research survey showed that among adults aged 18 to 30, only 8% said they would consider buying a full-size truck, down from 27% a decade earlier. The shift wasn't just generational, it was ideological. The traditional automakers, caught off guard by the speed of this shift, scrambled to respond. GM's internal Project Flint sought to develop a no-frills electric pickup priced under $30,000, 0 cents, though insiders admitted the company was years behind schedule. Ford, under pressure from shareholders and government regulators, began planning what one executive called a spiritual reboot of its truck division. Smaller models, simpler trims, and fewer luxury gimmicks. Ram went a different route, partnering with a Chinese battery supplier to cut production costs and stay competitive in the fleet market. The message from the top was clear: adapt or die. Yet even these pivots carried a sense of desperation. For decades, the Big Three had built their entire business models on the assumption that bigger was always better. Bigger trucks, bigger profits, bigger dreams. Now they faced a market that no longer believed in that equation. The American psyche itself was shifting. Environmental awareness, economic pragmatism, and digital transparency were eroding the myths that once held up the pickup's cultural power. A generation raised on the internet was no longer impressed by size or horsepower. They cared about software updates, reliability, and total cost of ownership. And yet, for all the optimism, the transformation carried a bitter-sweet tone. The old guard, the generations who grew up equating the rumble of a V8 with pride, watched this change with disbelief. For them, the sound of silence that came with electric motors wasn't progress, it was loss. But history doesn't wait for nostalgia. The market, brutal and unfeeling, had moved on. What began as a financial crisis was ending as a cultural reckoning. The pickup truck, once America's mechanical anthem of power and persistence, had been forced to confront its own excess. The economic bubble had burst, the trust had eroded, and the myth had been stripped bare. What remained was something leaner, humbler, and perhaps, in its own way, more authentic. A return to purpose, after decades of pretense. The road ahead was uncertain, but one truth had become impossible to ignore. In the new America, simplicity was the new strength. By the end of 2026, the American pickup truck stood at a crossroads. The old empire of chrome, torque, and testosterone had finally begun to crumble, leaving behind something leaner, quieter, and far more uncertain. The crisis that had started as a simple market correction had evolved into a cultural shift so profound that even the industry's most powerful players couldn't stop it. What once symbolized strength and freedom now represented something entirely different, a lesson in the limits of excess. The collapse of the pickup bubble was not a sudden implosion, but a slow, grinding surrender. Dealerships that once boasted month-long waiting lists for luxury trims now advertised desperate clearance sales, with banners promising factory direct pricing and last chance for gas power. Yet customers were no longer fooled. Many had turned away from the traditional brands entirely, choosing instead to wait for the new generation of electric utility trucks, smaller, modular, and affordable. The sales data told the story better than any headline could. In 2026, electric pickups accounted for 38% of all truck sales in the United States, up from just 7% 2 years earlier. For the first time in history, Ford's F-Series lost its title as America's best-sellered vehicle, dethroned by a newcomer. The Slate E-Truck won. The shock reverberated across Detroit. For decades, the F-150 had been untouchable, a cultural monument as much as a machine. But the tide had turned, and the very qualities that once made it iconic were now its greatest liabilities. its size, its noise, its appetite for fuel, all felt outdated in a world moving toward efficiency and environmental awareness. Ford executives tried to spin the narrative, calling the shift an evolution of the American work ethic. But insiders knew the truth. It was survival, not strategy.